This is the Metal Queens podcast. I'm Steve Richards. Welcome to yet another episode where we highlight the fiercest voices in heavy music. Today we're diving into the dark, enigmatic world of death rock and post-punk with none other than Tears for the Dying, the trans-fronted goth death rock post-punk band that's been haunting stages from Atlanta to Athens since 1990 and beyond, since 1997. Founded by the multi-instrumentalist and visionary Adria, Tears for the Dying has built a legacy of introspective, political, and beautifully shadowed soundscapes, blending goth, death rock, electronic drum machines, and razor-sharp lyricism as well. Their first new original song is out now. It's called Cinders. It's the first original single since In the Shadow of the Midnight Sun. This single dropped back in October. It's out now on Bandcamp, streaming everywhere. So let's dive into the dark. This is Tears for Dying, and this is Adria. Welcome to the Metal Queens podcast.
Thank you for having me on.
It's great to have you here. So, Tears for the Dying formed back in '97. Take us back, Adria. What sparked the creation of this project, and how has its identity evolved over the years?
Right. The band began, as you mentioned, in 1997. So I was just coming out as trans around that time. I'd been identifying as what I called back then as androgynous, but I guess today we would have used words like non-binary.
Right.
Um, earlier back in the early to mid 90s. And so I started identifying more as trans and in the mid to late 90s. And with that came a lot of heavy emotions around what that meant for me. And having grown up in a very conservative Christian household, there's a juxtaposition of me being true to myself and being who I am, and also making my family happy, and growing up in religion, and how does religion see me. And so thus began some kind of existential back and forth in my head about how that would work out. And ultimately, this led to me starting to write some just poetry. And so some of those early poems would eventually become Tears for the Dying songs. In fact, the very first one that we recorded way back in 2002 here in Athens was a song called Time. And that's one of the early poems I wrote, just kind of existential crisis of sorts, with just coming to terms with being trans in a very Christian Southern Baptist kind of area. So,
The name Tears for the Dying, where did that come from?
I mean, there's a there's not like a really a deep lore to the name. It's just it evoke as a lot of goth band names do. They evoke certain imagery, and that's kind of important to me. I just having losing loved ones, my grandmother and my grandfather and all that, and seeing
Mm.
that process occur, and like there's just a lot of heavy emotions around death, and so that kind of bore the name Tears for the Dying. Because I like I'm a very emotional person, and I
Mm.
really kind of, I mean, as a lot of goths are, introverted and introspective. And I wanted a name that kind of really evoked that style of relating to the world.
Athens, Georgia, of course, has a deep alternative music history, REM and others. How did that scene shape the sound and spirit of this band?
For sure. So I again, going back to my Christian upbringing, I did not really get involved in going to see shows until I was, well into my late teens, early 20s.
Mm.
So by this time, I would have been, it's about late 80s or so. I would have already passed the punk movement, and I would have
Yeah.
passed really cool new wave bands that were happening in Athens, Georgia, such as the B-52s and Pylon and REM. So I didn't really find much about those bands until like the mid to late 80s, and a lot of that had to do with one of my older brothers who at the time um I'm- was pretty cool. He was into some really cool music, and he introduced me to a lot of cool bands like REM and Fetch and Bones from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And so I kind of latched on to college rock in that time, and I was, you know, really big into listening to bands like B-52s, but especially Pylon. Pylon were a huge interest of mine. I saw them play in the late 1980s a couple of times. And they were one of the bands where I was so afraid and just so scared to go into a club. I was just terrified. I'd never been to one before. And so I went in to go see, Pylon play, and like their music was so infectious, like the drums, the bass line, it was kind of Gang of Four-ish. I don't know if you've listened to Pylon much, but very just very angular style, but the bass is very groovy, and then Vanessa's vocal style was not, it wasn't like screamo punk, but like sometimes like she would sing normally and then it would kind of turn into a little scream at the end of a phrase or something. It had a very unique, cool quality to it that I loved. So I wound up, they're one of the very first bands I went to go to see that I started dancing to. And I saw them a couple times, as I mentioned, and then the second time I saw them play, I was like, you know what, this looks, I won't say it's easy, but I could do that. If they can go on stage and play this, I could do that too. And that's kind of got in my head. I wanted to be in a band.
Adria, your sound blends goth, death rock, post punk, electronic drum machines, and that signature dark guitar texture. What elements do you consider the very core of the Tears for the Dying sound?
Bass guitar. I feel like bass drives a lot of what we do. It's the instrument I'm most interested in playing. I like playing guitar and bass, and we do that in our shows. I switch off depending on the song. Um, Bass is the heart of the music, I feel, of Tears. And then, you know, definitely there's a lot of texture and ambience that goes on with guitars and with reverbs and stuff like that. I like on the guitar. So for sure, I'd say bass.
Fans often compare your music to icons like 45 Grave and Christian Death. How do you feel about those comparisons?
I mean, yeah, there were big influences on me, for sure. Yeah, so just a quick, if you have to edit this out too, do we have a time limit? Do I need to be brief?
No, you're good.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, these were bands that were very influential on me. Going back to the early 1990s, I was playing in punk bands back then in Athens, and didn't really know how to play my instrument very well. And over the span of a couple years, I got where I could finally play bar chords okay, and started writing my own songs. And the bass player of the band came to me with one of my new noodles that I showed him. He's like, this sounds a lot like, some goth stuff or whatever. I had no idea what goth was. And have you listened to Boohoo's? And I was like, who's Boohoo's? Of course I misheard Bauhaus. And so he pulls out like In the Flat Fields and shows me the album cover. I'm like, oh, it looks like art rock or whatever. And like, I was just so much into like really heavy, punk music, I wasn't ready for it right then. But then he says, we should have record night because there's some stuff I think I'd like for you to listen to. So we planned a record night. We got a bottle of wine, got some pizza, and so we sat down in Steve's apartment. He had probably thousands and thousands of records all in these big shelves around the wall. So he goes over and pulls out like 3 or 4 albums. And we first listened to the Plasmatics. He knew I loved punk. And so that, I never heard the Plasmatics before. And so that was really cool. It was like this Japanese import where they had the Japanese drummer. And it's like, Ishii Sanshi. And like, it was fucking awesome. So then it pulls out Autopsy by 45 Grave. And I mean, I love it. And I love the fact that it was a lot more complex than like stuff I'd been listening to, like, stuff like the Ramones and the Kennedys and all that. It's like the guitar textures and like the chord movements and all that were a lot. I mean, I had trouble trying to figure out how to play them. And so that was really interesting to me. But yet they were punk and death rock. Of course, I didn't know what the fuck death rock as a term was back then. I called it punk. So I absolutely loved it. My favorite songs that we listened to that night at 45 Grave were Wax and Black Cross. And Black Cross is still probably in my top 5 favorite songs of all time. So we then moved on to another record, and this record was just pulled out 40 a Christian Death's Only Theater of Pain, and he put the album on the turntable and started playing it, and my mind was just I was captivated. I was blown away and I was enthralled by what it was I was hearing. It wasn't punk, but it sounded kind of punk. I wasn't sure whether the singer was a guy or girl. It didn't really matter to me, but it was really ambiguous, and I loved that. And I loved like it just sounded so dark and textured. And that record, and I went out and got my own copy of it eventually, and I played and over and over again, was huge, huge in the development of my musical interests. And then from Christian Death, of course, I finally went out and started looking for some stuff on my own. This was well before internet. So we basically had, fanzines, which, mostly were punk type stuff. And so for finding goth stuff, it was just kind of, you go to maybe you'd have like record shows, like they, set up shop, in a mall or a little building somewhere, and you can leaf through records that always have a section of punk and stuff. And I already knew Christian Death, and I kind of figured out, okay, it's called goth. That's what I need to look for. And so I'd find records by like Joy Division or Susie and the Banshees or Dance Society. Eventually, I get into Sisters of Mercy, like with Reptile House was my first album by them. So I just found the genre of music that really spoke to me, and it was like, whereas punk was and still is to me, it's really important. It's very outward focused, and like gothic music is very inwardly focused. And I just really it kind of meets where I am in life. Like I don't know, it's a good fit. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how my sound was definitely influential from those bands. And even going back to like you mentioned like 45 Grays, like a Southern California punk band. Like when I was into punk rock, that was my style of music, was Southern LA punk, stuff like Germs, and like fucking, X and the Mau Mau's, like you name it. Like I was just into like Dangerous House, the label, everything they put out, Circle Jerks and all that. I listen to that shit over and over and over again. So if you hear a little about in the music, that's where that comes from. And so I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe I could have been.
you mentioned Susie and the Banshees brings me back to my college radio days.
Mm.
Do you write the lyrics first, or do you build the soundscape and let the words kind of emerge from there? Especially, let's talk about the single Cinders.
Mm. For sure. So I always do music first, um, with a caveat. Once in a blue moon, I'll write lyrics. You know,
Does it
I mean,
vary?
it does. When I say like Time, the song we talked a little bit before earlier, those lyrics were pretty much already written by the time, and I kind of put some music and I said, let me put this lyric on here, and that's what that was. Um, Normally though, I'll flesh a full song out and then I'll kind of figure out what I want words to be on it. Like in the past, I'd have just notebooks and I would write, phrases or words down and use a thesaurus and just do things the hard way of putting words together. And these days it's a little easier on the computer. Like I can kind of keep stuff in documents or on my phone. I can have a text document. So if I'm driving down the road and I think of a phrase or something, I can just like, speak the phrase into the text app and it'll be there for me to come back. And so when it's time for me to start putting a song together, I can then like just go through all my words and I can kind of peel out phrases and they'll inspire other other words that come from that idea. So that's basically how that came about. And so Cinders was kind of the same idea, just is going through my lyrics and finding some stuff. And I just felt called to write about what's going on in Palestine. And, it's a really heavy subject. Um, and, I just it's a frustrating situation that's going on. Knowing that like I feel like I'm helpless to do much about it. I've donated to USRWA like to kind of give aid and it's just it's infuriating to be in the States and not just to see this country obliterated, and just
Yeah.
to see the before pictures back, going back to the 2010s and seeing now, there's nothing left. It's just all rubble. And it's the so that really sparked what Cinders would become, was a song about what's going on in Gaza, told through my kind of experiencing that over here.
So, Adria, you have this single out now. What are the plans for 2026? More singles, an EP, an album?
Yeah, definitely singles. I definitely like doing the single, and then and eventually we'll put that out as a record. So I have a handful of things right now that are in the doll. I'm working on words and getting things squared away for it. So we'll see how that shapes out.
Tears for the Dying has a very visual, emotional presence on stage too. What are the plans for touring in 2026?
Right now, I'm taking a break from doing shows in early 2026 to work on music. So we have like the last several years, we have been doing average 20 shows a year, which is not much when you
Mm.
think about it compared to like other bands who are doing full time. But for, for me as having a full time job, it's a lot of shows considering what I'm able to do right now. So for sure. So I'm going to take a little bit of time off this coming year and to kind of really focus on writing. And we've got like Midnight Sun, and even going back to stuff, even back on, Charon and Memories, the EPs that came out before Midnight Sun is like, um, and I love deathrock, and I mean, I love playing those songs live. They're so much fun. There's some songs on Midnight Sun that are like way off into like basically they're grindcore, like,
Mm.
and I kind of feel like I'm at a point where I'm going to move away from that side of and really kind of just kind of get back to the roots of what I was doing originally, which is like just death rock and goth. Um, that's kind of where I'm wanting to go musically. And like certainly with the Cinders, like we've kind of like introduced some elements that are commonly found maybe in some other like under the goth umbrella, other subgenres, dark wave with some of the synth bass and the keyboards and things like that. So I do enjoy doing some tracks like that, but definitely I feel like I want to get back to just like some really just kind of core goth rock and death rock.
She's Adria from Tears for the Dying here on the Metal Queens podcast. New single, Cinders, is out now. Check it out on Bandcamp, also on all streaming platforms. They are a band carrying nearly 3 decades of underground legacy while continuing to evolve, challenge, and haunt the scene with their unmistakable sound. Support them. Tour dates next year, working on more new music. Check out new singles. It's all coming. Adria, thanks so much for joining me here on the Metal Queens podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching and listening. I'm Steve Richards. Like it, share it, subscribe to it, write a review. I will talk to you again next time.